Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Global South Women's Forum on Sustainable Development. My name is Pravin, and I'm the technical host for the session. I would just like to run through a few virtual housekeeping announcements. To conserve bandwidth and improve the network connectivity of yourself, as well as your fellow participants and speakers, please turn off your videos. And speakers, please turn on your videos when you will be speaking. In order to prevent any unwanted interruptions, please mute your microphones and close, as well as close any unnecessary programs if you're experiencing slow bandwidth. This is an interactive session, so please feel free to use the public chat box to engage with one another. The session is live streamed and the recording will remain public on the ERA Asia Pacific YouTube channel. ERA Asia Pacific is committed to making GSWF an inclusive and safe digital environment and will not tolerate harassment of any kind, including but not limited to deliberate intimidation and sustained disruption of discussion. Participants are obliged to be respectful and to avoid replicating societal prejudices and inequalities. Participants who engage in disruptive behavior may be removed without prior notice. And with this, I would now pass on the floor to today's moderator, Magdalena. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, wherever in whatever part of the world you are. Here in Mexico City is at night, is 8 p.m. So it's a pleasure to welcome you. We have an amazing panel today, and we're going to have a session with a more interactive and informal format to allow everyone to participate and collectively learn and share our experiences and move forward to on the debate. Before we start, we would like to provide a brief space to allow everyone in the audience to introduce themselves and share their names, organizations, and country in which you are based, and a few lines about how your work relates to public service and gender. So we are now sending or sharing a link to a Google spreadsheet on the chat. So I invite all of you who are connected right now to go to the chat and link there and put your name and your information so we can get a sense of who is participating today and from where. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that, or less than a few minutes. And while you and all of you do that, we are going to then share the screen with the names of those who have registered. So go to the chat and put your information there. My colleague Alejandra is showing. Nobody is daring to, oh, the document is view only. It seems that we have a problem. Let's see if somebody else can join. Well, then we were going to leave that for the moment. I'm going to, at the same time, introduce yourself to the speakers that we have tonight. We have first, it's going to be Kate Donald. Kate is the Director of Program at the Center for Economic and Social Rights. Before joining the Center for Economic and Social Rights in 2014, Kate was the senior advisor to somebody that I know very well, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, and who I was the Special Rapporteur at that moment. But Kate has also experience working at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, at the International Council on Human Rights Policy, and as a consultant to the United Nations and to the Gender and Development Network. We will also have Veronica Montúfar, the Gender Equality Officer of Public Service International, PSI. Hello, Veronica. Before joining PSI, Veronica was Executive Secretary of Amnesty International in Ecuador and Trade Union Educator at the Ecuadorian National Trade Union Center. Since 2015, she was appointed as the Gender Equality Office at PSI. And last but not least, we have Angela Taneja. Angela, can we see you there? Angela is the campaign lead for inequality and the lead for the public services at Oxfam India. She leads the work on education, health, and inequality at Oxfam India. And Angela is also one of the founding members of the Right to Education Forum, India's largest education network. So I don't know now, Alejandra, who is helping me, if we can share the list of the Excel sheet, if that was sorted out. If not, we continue with the program tonight. I don't know, I don't see if we can share that. No. Okay, so I'm going to move now to a brief presentation while we sort that out. I don't know. And I'm going to introduce this great panel. So today we're going to discuss about advancing human rights through gender responsive public services, a feminist alternative to privatization. The pandemic and the economic and social crisis it has generated has laid bare the devastating consequences of widespread privatization of public services that are essential for the realization of women's rights, such as healthcare, education, and social security. For more than 4 decades, in most parts of the world, the myth that the private sector could deliver more efficient and accessible services than those publicly owned fostered the implementation of economic measures where services traditionally owned and delivered by the state have increasingly passed to private hands. Privatization of public services can have several forms, and its implication and characteristics may vary depending on the sector, but there is a growing consensus that these economic measures have not only failed to deliver in terms of cost efficiency, but they have also raised important human rights concerns. For example, several United Nations special procedures and other human rights monitoring bodies have flagged the fact that privatization of public services has increased segregation, has reduced access by those living in poverty, and has represented a move away from shared responsibility, democratic decision-making, and the public provision of services for the common interest. Privatization and commodification of public services have resulted in diminished and profit-driven social services that have fallen short to the challenges posed by the pandemic. Moreover, the lack of access to good quality public services has disproportionately impacted women and girls. However, there is an opportunity. One of the silver lining of this terrible pandemic is the support of public services has generated in the common citizens. This crisis have recalled the vital importance of solidarity mechanism and the critical role of public services to ensure the enjoyment of fundamental rights. The pandemic has also made starkly clear that the formal economy cannot keep on depending on the invisible unpaid care of women and girls. There is no doubt that if states use the opportunity to invest in gender responsive services and to reorganize care responsibilities, we will have a stronger and more gender inclusive society. Therefore, in this session, we're convened today with 2 main objectives. On the one hand, we would like to collectively deepen the analysis and reflection on the main impacts that privatization and commodification of essential public services have on women's rights. And on the other hand, we would like to articulate and share ideas, projects, initiatives, and feminist alternatives to the privatization of public services in order to advance gender justice. So this is the main framework that we will be discussing today. And as I said, we will also try to have some important and informal exercise. So I'm going to try to the second one. The first one didn't work, but we're going to now provide another link, and you will have 3 minutes to everyone to fill on this board. And what we would like you to answer here is really the main questions of the session. We would like to ask you to tell us, to share with us, what are the main impact on gender that you see from the privatization of public services. So I'm crossing my fingers to see if this time this works. And we are sharing the instructions and the link in the chat. So I hope that everyone can see the instructions in the chat. You have to probably cut and paste that link and put some few words that you would like to share with us. Main impact of the privatization of public service in gender. In the document, you will see bigger the words that are more people are including there. So in order to give you also more opportunities to write, now we are going to stop sharing the screen and we're going to move to the first round of interventions. In this first round, each participant will have 6 minutes to respond the first question that will be the same for all of them. We would like to know your insights on the key impacts of privatization and commodification of public services on women's rights. Kate, you go first. You have 6 minutes.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here with all of you. It's also nighttime where I am, and it's snowing outside, and it's so if you hear the pitter patter in the background, that's what it is. It's the snow hitting my window. So yeah, it's really great to be here, and thank you so much to the Global Initiative on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights for convening this session on a really important topic, which they've been doing incredibly important and cutting edge work on for the last few years, because surprisingly, the human rights community actually hasn't addressed head on the issue of privatization as much as it should have done. And GI is one of the organizations, I think, really changing that. So I'm gonna talk more from the kind of macro, and I'm gonna be quite brief, and I'm gonna talk mostly at the kind of macro level, because I think looking at the word cloud that everyone has kind of jointly produced, from that tool. I think it's, probably most people here are quite familiar with some of the more micro level and more immediate level impacts. And I think some of my fellow panelists will talk about that too. But I think, I think hopefully it's clear to most people here that privatization, can have very discriminatory effects, because the private actors who come into public service provision are motivated not by making sure that everyone has coverage, but by making a profit, essentially. And that almost always means that the people who are worse off already then get even more disadvantaged by the privatized public services. So I'm going to talk a bit more at the macro level at what I think are the kind of big macro level implications for increased privatization of public services and why those are damaging. So first of all, I think this is one of the reasons why I think privatization has such damaging implications for human rights is because it's part of a much broader and very dangerous shift in values and a kind of philosophy of governance. What Philip Alston, one of the other former special rapporteurs on extreme poverty and human rights, called a kind of deeper process of value transformation. And I think this is really key that we tackle this kind of broader shift that privatization is kind of at the vanguard of, because it's this idea that essentially that the state is inefficient, that the private sector is efficient, and the idea that the state should be small, and that the market can solve all our problems, which I think it's increasingly clear, especially in the context of COVID, that the market most certainly cannot solve all our problems, and in fact is creating more problems than it is solving. And one kind of clear example of this kind of shift that privatization creates is this kind of starving the state of resources. It's a vicious circle. The argument is made, that we have to privatize public services because we don't have the money for it. But then, of course, there's less justification to raise taxes if the state isn't providing public services. So it really undercuts the argument for progressive taxation, and it really changes the fiscal balance of power, I think, in a really dangerous way. So I think that's something that we really have to grapple with and recognize. Secondly, I think it exacerbates gender inequalities, not just at the kind of micro and grassroots and kind of daily life level, but also at the kind of macro level in terms of who controls power and resources. Because when we have privatization, essentially kind of the goods get taken out of the pocket of people who are at the bottom of the heap and get given to people at the top. And we all know that, unfortunately, in most societies, it is women and gender non-conforming people who are at the bottom of the heap, and it is men who are the shareholders of these companies, primarily the shareholders and CEOs of these companies who are making a lot of money. So it widens the kind of gendered inequalities in terms of who holds resources in that respect. And I also think it's really important to note it also perpetuates global inequalities too, because privatization of public services, especially in the global south, essentially means like commodification in order to profit transnational corporations and their shareholders, most of whom are in the global north, at the expense of people and especially women in the global south. So I think it really contributes to a kind of much broader widening of inequalities between countries, between the global north and the global south. So I'm going to leave it there, but looking forward to the rest of the discussion. You're on mute, Magdalena.
Thank you, Kate, for keeping on time and with less minutes that you were assigned. So thank you very much. Veronica, you have the floor now. What are the impact on women and girls of privatization? And you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Answering your question, I will say with big capital letters, exclusion. We are experiencing the hardest crisis ever seen on women's labor and decent work in the COVID pandemic. And as you and Kate already said, this pandemic and its severe and disproportionate impact with intersecting dimensions on women performing their historically built roles as healthcare providers and caregivers make us understand that the only way of reversing inequalities is public. The future is public. Yes, for sure, it is. Yes, we have heard a destructive narrative that has been sought to undermine the value of our public sector. And now more than ever, we can say that these are all lies. And I want to comment on a recent article written by PSI Assistant General Secretary Daniel Bertosa, who give us some facts on what had happened with the private sector, with privatized services during the pandemic in the global north. And he said that in the UK, the privatized supply chain that provides personal protective equipment, PPE, has been implicated in unnecessary deaths of many health workers, most of them women. In Eastern Ontario, the epicenter of Canada long-scare deaths, 82% of deaths occur in for-profit facilities. Private nursing homes were also the epicenter of the COVID outbreak in Melbourne, Australia, with 100% of COVID-related old age care deaths in privately run facilities. The Australian Financial Review noted that this equated to 45% of all deaths in the state, and that 180 publicly run care centers have had only a small number of infections. In the other hand, austerity programs that undermine public capacity often rely on women stepping in to provide care and public services when the state fails in its responsibilities. We can mention that across South Asia, there are at least 1.2 million women working as community health workers, delivering public primary health services. They are now at the front line response to COVID-19 pandemic. With the exception of Pakistan, these women are not recognized as public health workers and are instead treated as volunteers paid as little as $2 per week. But also under quarantine circumstances, long working hours combined with lockdown measures restricting mobility for families have placed additional pressure on women as caregivers, particularly in the cases in which children and elderly people are at home. This burden of unpaid care work, which is already disproportionately high in normal times, is putting women under considerable stress in time of crisis and exposing them to gender-based violence. A recent research study carried out by PSI in some Latin American countries, such as Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, Peru, and Paraguay, demonstrates unreasonable working conditions in public sector during the pandemic, affecting hardest and acknowledging the existence of a broken public care system. There is no public care provisions in these countries that can help women to not have this burden of work. For this reason, we have decided in PSI that it's time to change the course and the discourse on care and move from situating care only in the economic sphere and open it to the political sphere, where the role of the state underpins human rights and women's rights. For that, we propose to move from the care economy approach to the social organization of care approach, and start formulating alternatives for fixing the current crisis and rebuilding the social organization of care that now is so unfair. This could imply 5 R's that we are proposing. First, recognizing the social and economic value of care work, paid or unpaid, and the human right to care. The second, rewarding, ensure decent remuneration, pensions, working conditions, and social protection for women that are working. Third, reduce unpaid care work and enable women to make their own decisions about workforce participation. And for sure, we need to also tackle the way to redistributing the care work. We think that it's needed not only to have this work on women's hands. We need to change the hands of this work, to change between women and men, between the households and also the state, by providing public quality care systems, but also reclaiming back our public services and reinforcing the role of a state in building gender responsive quality care systems. Thank you, Magdalena.
Thank you very much, Veronica. And also for reminding us about exclusion in capital letters and the importance of reclaiming and claiming back public services. Now I will give the floor to Angela for this first set of questions about the impact of privatization and commodification on women and girls. Veronica, you have the floor.
So, multiple, what are the impacts? A lot of them. Therefore, the obvious ones in that sense is the fact that it has impact on the actual realization of the fundamental rights. And we're talking about basics necessary for decent human survival, like health, education, who are, both from a human rights point of view and from a innate logic of the need for those to be available for everyone. What is the nature of the impact on the realization? One is it impacts the access to the service. Obviously, in a lot of instances, the reliance on the private brings with it out-of-pocket expenditure and user fees, which excludes the poor, those that are most in need of the service to begin with. For example, in India, and I talk about India as someone, obviously one falls back on the examples of the country that one knows, not least given we are hosting this in Asia. 68% of patients in urban India and 57% in rural areas talk about financial constraints as being the main reason why they resort to treatment without medical advice. So therefore, it's not just access to service, it's also risk when you take medicines without having to need to go to a doctor. What's the impact across the world? Evidence during the course of the COVID pandemic suggests that countries with the highest out-of-pocket expenditure have also had the highest COVID rates, which you could in some way also consider as a proxy to highly privatized public health systems. Yes, there is insurance, but as a via media, but insurance, private insurance usually brings its own drawbacks. And also, again, in my country, 68% of expenditure is out of patient costs. And currently, most insurance, including public insurance, doesn't cover out of OPD expenses and only covers hospitalization costs. What's the implication? Implication is for forcing people to choose. For women, it means rationing of healthcare choices. Should I go to the doctor? Should my child go to the doctor? Maybe I can manage. And by the time the woman ends up accessing healthcare, it may be too late. It also, in the case of education, creates sorting effects. It's not just fees, but it's also the fact that private schools themselves might be choosing, and not only parents having to choose between siblings, whether the boy goes to a private school or is the girl who goes to the private school. And again, this has had its impact in terms of exclusion during the COVID era. It also changes the nature of the right. Because, for example, if you're privatizing, say, ancillary health services, you're also changing the nature of what the health service is. Instead of it being a package, instead of it being a single nature of provision, you divide the service into pieces delivered by different actors. It reduces the quality of education to just learning outcomes rather than a holistic vision. And it reduces incentives for, say, primary healthcare. Again, having its especially preventive healthcare during the COVID era, it's the social determinants of health which, to a large extent, drive the possibility of getting the disease. What's the second level of impact? It's segregation. In the case of education, it means that the rich and the rich going to private schools, the poor going to government schools, will never meet, will never have a single generation of the rich and the poor growing together as citizens of one country. Therefore, it creates segregation, it damages social cohesion. Again, as the pandemic has shown, it creates the risk of the survival of the richest in a world that is already highly unequal. Again, in India, the richest 10% hold 77% of the nation's wealth. In such a context, it is nothing shows inequality the more than the fact that the rich and the poor would have something like a 20-year survival rate difference, with the rich living, or people or women from upper caste backgrounds living 17 years longer than those from lower castes. It damages social cohesion both at the social level, breaking the social bonds in society. It's the public system that creates the space for collective solidarity. And the loss of that public space through commercialized private provision, it damages that social bonds of society, but it also damages family bonds where parents choose whether which school do they send the boy or the girl. It also uh, creates the uh, growing privatization results in the loss of the formal space of citizen participation, which is both for collective bargaining and for social accountability. In There may be spaces for parents, for mothers, for fathers to come together to take in an education setting for collective bargaining to improve the status and the functioning of a school. Those spaces end up being lost when private provision ends up the mainstream model of delivery. And at the same time, it's also parents become consumers, and it becomes an individualized right rather than a collective right. Lastly, goes without saying that there are new forms of rights violation in the absence of this citizen and democratic oversight. We have had instances of unnecessary medical procedures, for example, hysterectomies of women by private providers. In one survey, almost 3% of women in India had gone the procedure because it's more expensive. You get to charge. So therefore, there are incentives which are not available in the public to to do things that are unnecessary. And of course, there is the if one has to end with something, it's the nature of democracy. You changes. You turn rights holders into consumers, which is certainly not the way things should be.
Thank you very much, Angela. So in recapping the answers of this first question regarding impact, we see the starving of state resources, exacerbate gender inequality, exclusion, forcing women to choose which rights they can afford, change the nature of right, reduces incentive to seek health care, segregation, damage to social cohesion, loss of formal spaces of political participation, and right holders becomes consumer. These are key issues, of course, and women are disproportionately impacted. So the next question actually moved from impact to having some solutions. So the question that I will pose now to all the speakers is, why and how do you think we should reorganize public services to realize women's rights and advance gender equality? So I give the floor in the same order. Kate, you have the floor first for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and I wanted to also just sign on very vociferously to what Veronica and Angela both said. I think they made really, really crucial points, and also kind of spotlighted a little bit the way forward as well. And I especially wanted to say something about Angela's point about out-of-pocket costs on health, which I think is a really crucial point. I mean, that, you know, sometimes the proponents of privatization talk as if it's not, you know, as if it's a crowding in situation, as if it's a win-win situation for everyone. But I mean, all the evidence that we see shows that, you know, the less money that the state spends on health, especially in health, for example, the more money that citizens have to end up paying. So, you know, there's similar statistics around out-of-pocket costs. In Egypt, we work with partners in Egypt to monitor social and economic rights, the social and economic rights situation there. And Egypt has actually seen a decline in its health budget in recent years as part of related to a loan package from the IMF. And actually, so Egypt's spending on public health is about 1% of GDP, which is extremely low, even for other middle-income countries, even compared to other middle-income countries. And at the same time, as public spending on health has gone down, out-of-pocket costs have soared. And I think it's about the same as India. Makes up about 60% of total health expenditure is out-of-pocket costs that people have to spend. So it really perpetuates so many inequalities, and there really is a kind of direct damaging effect on people's pockets and resources. So in terms of the way forward, I mean, I think part of what Veronica talked about really spotlights the way we need to go. And I do think that we really need to change the narrative around public services, and, you know, really reclaim them as public goods, reclaim them as human rights to which we're all entitled, and especially need to change the narrative around care as well. Like, I really think that a big part of the solution, a big part of the way forward, is really like putting care at the center of our economies and at the center of our societies, and reflecting that the fact that care is not a kind of individualized problem that households have to solve. Care is a collective social responsibility, which we should all be contributing to. And in particular, those with most ability to pay, the rich in our societies, should be contributing to the kind of social responsibility of care, a kind of social pact on care, through progressive taxation, precisely. I also think, there are some really interesting initiatives happening, which TNI, the Transnational Institute, have done a lot of work on around remunicipalization. I always have problems saying that word. It's a real mouthful, but there is, that although we are seeing big trends towards privatization, especially from kind of global institutions and international financial institutions are continuing to push privatization and different forms of privatization as a solution. We are seeing at the kind of country and especially at the local level, we are seeing moves to reclaim public services, largely in recognition that privatization hasn't worked. Even in its stated aims of saving money, it hasn't worked in many contexts. So, TNI has some great resources, kind of putting case studies of remunicipalization drives that have worked in certain parts of the world. Like there's a famous example from Chile, from Santiago, or a particular neighborhood in Santiago. Magdalena would probably know better than me about public pharmacies. There's a famous example from Valladolid in Spain about the water service which had been privatized, being municipalized again, back in public hands, and it became much more efficient and became much less exclusionary, and the service improved as well. So there's lots of kind of, I think, encouraging case studies like that. And also I think that it's, in my view, the shift to reclaim public services and reclaim public services as a human right needs to be part of a broader shift in how we think about our economies and our economic systems, and kind of reclaiming our economies, building feminist economies, building what we at CSR are terming a rights-based economy. So really like building out of a vision of like, if we were trying to construct our economies again, with the aim in mind of that these economies should be realizing human rights for everyone, then how would we build those economies? And I think it's very clear that we wouldn't hand over our public services to profiteering private actors if we were starting from scratch with that human rights goal in mind. So I think that bigger shift to a rights-based economy with care at the center of our economies, public services in public hands at the center of our economies is really crucial. That's it from me for now.
Thank you very much, Kate. And now I give the floor to Veronica.
Yes, thank you, Magdalena. Yes, I want to share about this concept PSI has worked a long time ago regarding quality public services that refer to some issues. First of it, public. When we are talking about public, we are saying publicly funded, publicly delivered and managed, publicly governed and accountable to the public. So public is a very broad expression, and we achieve this all in this concept, public. The other thing that we think that quality public services has to have is solidarity. The principle of solidarity underpins human rights and the obligation to deliver public services. I think that the key question are really how human rights or public services are the material basis of how human rights are being exercised by citizens, by population. The other thing is that the quality public services have to be transparent and accountable. Effective democratic governance of public services requires transparency and decision-making, financing, building, delivery, monitoring, and reviewing. These processes must be open to public scrutiny. We also say that quality public services also need to have a consultative and a participatory decision making. So citizens have the right to contribute to decision making process that affect them. And the other thing that we are saying that quality public services should have is that they have to be delivered by public sector workers that enjoy decent work. And when we are talking about decent work, we are talking about the ILO concept of decent work, and specifically for public services workers, two ILO conventions, Convention 151 and 154. But in addition of that, since our last Congress in 2017, PSI integrate a qualifier to these QPS, these quality public services. And this new qualifier is gender responsiveness. When we are talking of gender responsiveness, we are talking that, yes, public services are essential to ensure women the material basis to exercise their full rights, and a failure to integrate a gender transformative approach or gender transformative strategies could result in discriminatory services. Further, public services are key to transforming patriarchal histories and the structural causes of discrimination in all senses. If designed, funded, and delivered using gender transformative principles, they will not simply make discrimination more bearable, they can transform the distribution of power and resources that enables patriarchy to prosper. And I want to refer to this when I mention a study that we did in Peru. But first, I want to explain better what are these, what are the concepts, the provisions that we are thinking of this gender responsiveness, and how public services have to include them. First of all, we think that the priority, the priority objective is to redress the historical gender division of labor that places the burden of unpaid care predominantly in women and girls. We think that if women can access to quality public services, we can really transform the sexual division of labor. And this could be a key issue for that. But as well, we think that providing the provision of public services has to address specific needs of women and girls. Gender neutral public services have often resulted in indirect discrimination. Gender specific health services are essential, as are public services to address domestic violence and histories of discrimination. But in the other hand, public services has to respect, protect the fulfillment of women's rights to body integrity and no discrimination and a life free of violence. We think that public services are key in the struggle against gender-based violence, but also ensure that public services address the intersectional nature of discrimination. And we think that this intersecting dimension of discrimination is key when we tackle public services and design public services for specific communities. So for reinforcing this, I want to comment on this study that we did in Peru in 2017 that showed the holes of public resources that drain the state's capacities to invest in programs for alleviating gender gaps, as well as the need to invest in transformative approaches for achieving gender equality. The study revealed that there were huge amounts of tax elusion and tax evasion in Peru during the period of 2007 to 2017. Yet, although there was there also an increasement in the public budget during those years. This was because of the income of the boom of the commodities in the international markets. And that's why the public budget in Peru increased. We studied 7 public services directly related to women's and girls' well-being. And I want to point only 2 facts that we analyzed. First, around sexual and reproductive health, what we found was that while the number of chirurgical, I don't know how to pronounce this in English, chirurgical births increase, at the same time, there was an increasement of teenager pregnancies. So there was a huge question mark from us there. The second one is while the budget in the health sector grew, the budget in the public care services decreased. For example, 2 services, the kindergarten and the elderly care programs in rural sector were closed. We can clearly see here at least 2 indicators of non-transformative public services policies. The first one, non-investment in sexual and reproductive rights, only investing in health, but with not a criteria for really fixing the inequality, only investing to have attentions to these births. And the second one, the lack of priority for rural sector in those investments. So this study helped us to underline that gender responsive quality public services have to be gender transformative quality public services. We need to have a real focus on this responsiveness to make it transformative. Thank you, Magdalena.
Thank you very much, Veronica, in particular for the examples of how this gender responsiveness should be gender transformative. Before giving the floor to Angela, I'm going to invite everyone to submit your questions in the chat. We will have a little time for question and answer, so please be encouraged to do so. Angela, you have the floor.
So in some ways, it's a logical extension of what the other speaker was saying. I guess, for me, the question is less about what, but the question is how. To me, change is political, and we often end up forgetting it, thinking that if one has the right arguments, if only we could convince the other side, things would change. So therefore, but unfortunately, that's not how the cookie tends to crumble. Therefore, change is political, and we probably do need to be more political in our approach to ensure impact. Yes, Audrey had asked, is it possible to have change? Probably not overnight, but yes, reverses of privatization have happened. We have had instances where decades long policies have been, like Chile, for example, for school vouchers, have changed, have been reversed partly on the basis of a bottom upswell of public opinion, and a political process of ensuring that that happens. So therefore, how does this happen to me? It's about being more political, more oriented the to what the ordinary citizens want and speaking their language is probably where to me the beginning lies. Uh, what Kate, to me, it also repeating what Kate said, it's to me a lot of it is boils down to uh, we don't do enough work on changing the narrative. uh, we've It's important to defend the public, but I think it's time that we were more aggressive in pushing the envelope and taking the battle to the private sector. Yes, we love the public. Yes, we think it's critical, but if we only keep fighting a defensive battle, we will never win the fight. Therefore, yes, while defending the public, it's time that one also aggressively highlighted unconscionable instances of private sector behavior. To me, for example, and again, going back to the chat box, Preeti's comment about technology reliance at in the time of for education delivery at this point in time, and the technology billionaires' wealth, to me at this point in time is unconscionable, and it is time that we started highlighting those dimensions and not only said public is important. And it's not just saying this once or twice, it's about doing so consistently and pushing the same message again and again and again until people get it. The third part of it is reiterating the role of the state with respect to regulation of private and non-state sectors. Because again, why is privatization happening? It's at least partly because the governments have an impression that they're getting something out for nothing when there is an investment from the private sector. And when the private sector provider comes in which says, we will run this for you, we will do everything, you don't need to do anything. So therefore, it's the easiest, laziest way forward is to say outsource. So therefore, apart from the defending the public and having a public alternative, it's also the reiterating the role of the public sector and the role of the state to regulate the private. Because again, it is probably in most states no longer a question of just, we can't wish, the private sector is probably too big to wish it away. Therefore, again, the role of the state in its regard to prevent at least the most egregious human rights violations, and they happen every day. It's time that we had that on our agenda as well. What is it that's required to strengthen the public? It's the need for a national commitment to universal coverage and equality of outcomes. There needs to be a commitment to universal standards and universal equity. There needs to be a commitment to financing of, again, not just quantum of financing, but equitable financing. to ensure women's needs are recognized and addressed. But also, it's not just a single formula of everyone gets everything. Ultimately, the adaptation needs to be taken to ensure the feminist agenda is taken on board, but also agendas of other marginalized communities, because the needs of indigenous woman is different from a Dalit woman, from an urban poor woman, from a middle class woman. It's essential to defend the value of free services. Again, we're in the pandemic, so health examples come easy. In India, 63 million people are pushed into poverty every year due to healthcare expenses. That's no longer acceptable. What is it that's required for change to happen? It is feminist leadership. It's not just uh, policy advice, although policy advice is critical, but it's also the process of winning the hearts and minds of the system. And that process of winning of hearts and minds again has to come from within the system and not through consultants. Because, as I said, the easiest thing that the government finds is to have a private company come in to say, we have the solutions, please hire us, we will fix the public system for you. No, it's a harder task to make sure that the feminist transformation comes from within the public system, because there is no other way of making it sustainable. And yes, it's the details of making sure the governance reforms are undertaken in a manner that women's rights matter, and intersectionality within those women's rights are also recognized. Of course, agency of frontline workers, especially women frontline workers, is essential in any process of change. Goes without saying, even if we didn't have a PSI panelist. But ultimately, it's also active citizenship that drives reforms. It's the feminist movements that would be at the back of any sustainable process of change. It's bottom up, it's citizens groups, the networks of and civil society actors working on these issues. It's youth groups. It's also citizens from the bottom up who need to say enough is enough. We've had enough of private greed. It's time to now have to make sure that we have a public system that works for everyone, and because rights matter more than profits. That's it from
Thank
me.
you. Thank you very much, Angela. We're going to move, we have 30 minutes left. We're moving to our second participatory exercise. What we are going to ask you all is to share some good examples on rights-based alternatives to privatization of public services that have proven to be successful in the promotion of gender equality and the realization of women's rights. So we're putting a link there. If you click on there, you can put some post-it into that. And we're going to keep that link open for some time also after this session, so people can go back and think more on the session. But now also, while we move to this link, and while my colleague starts sharing the screen, I'm taking some few lines from the speakers to kind of trigger and to provoke question and answer. So in the second round, in which we were looking for some sort of solution, I'm going to take from Kate the fact that she called us to change the narrative on public services. And she asked us to put emphasis on public services as public goods and human rights. And she also raised this important concept that the Center for Economic and Social Rights is working on, this rights-based economy. Veronica put the issue of gender responsiveness and gender transformative public services, and explain in detail this very important implication of what is the meaning of quality and the meaning of public and publicly funded, deliver, manage, etc. The issue of solidarity, transparency, participation, these all issues that are, we would like to see your questions. And from Angela, I would like to take the point that she made regarding how change is political. And the call of Angela, very interesting one in that we also need to aggressively highlight the abuses of the private sector. It seems now that it's not enough to just call on the state to regulate the private sector, so a more aggressive approach to what are doing the companies, it is also important. So while you think on your questions and you can post them, we see some of them already in the chat. I'm going to ask my colleague Alejandra if you can share the screen again so people can see some responses so far. I should also mention that we will be preparing a brief document as an outcome of this session that we will share with everyone. So if you keep on posting positive experience, but also in the first link that we provided regarding the your contact, we will be disseminating to all of you those materials that we will prepare as an outcome of this session. So now we are going to move to some of the questions that it has been posed here by participants. There is one question about, are there best practices, models currently anywhere that reflect the changes advocated in this discussion? Any of the panelists would like to respond that question? You can open your mic and your video and go and speak directly to the group.
I can say something that's helpful to break the silence.
Go ahead, Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always a difficult point in the discussion when people ask for best practices, because obviously we see a lot of bad practices, but it is important to highlight where, and there's no, I wouldn't say there's any necessarily like perfect context or perfect policy, but there are some encouraging examples to highlight, and I would really encourage everyone to look at. I posted it on the board, but there are some really encouraging examples, especially TNI have done a great work of collecting these, of examples of citizens and people and communities pushing back against privatization and actually reclaiming public services, bringing them back into public hands after they have been privatized for some time. So TNI have published a lot of reports about this, and there include lots of very concrete case studies of where these movements have happened and where they've been successful. So I can paste it in the chat here too, but I have put it on the kind of collection that Alejandra is curating. So yeah, there's a couple of good examples there. Oh, also another one that is worth highlighting is, I think, in Uruguay, a couple of years ago, there's a new kind of act on care, which essentially kind of recognizes, it's not quite the language used, but essentially kind of recognizes care is something that should be provided to all people, and recognizes kind of like care as a public good and a public service, which I think is a promising practice, at least.
And in my case, I guess it goes down to the fact that I'm not a big fan of quote unquote best practice, because each practice evolves out of a certain political context. And one country's good practice can really bomb if taken to another context without recognizing the politics. So I guess that there are limitations of the best practice approach as well, that uh, last 20 years has taught me it doesn't quite work this way. But yes, the examples that were just cited by Kate are probably some examples that one can look at from the point of view of, is change even possible? Yes, it can.
Thank you, Veronica.
Yes, and I could add that maybe we can have an opportunity now with the COVID-19 vaccine. You know that the vaccine has been put in light by private companies, and now what we need to do is first to really know if all the knowledge of that vaccine production is private, because I think that most of the knowledge is public knowledge, first. And secondly, I think that we need to struggle very hard to make the vaccine a public good, and make the vaccine also to be handled with some criteria. And one of the criteria could be gender equality, intersecting the dimensions also of structural discrimination. So maybe there we have an opportunity to propose, and also an opportunity to construct a force, a civil society force to struggle for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Veronica. There are coming more questions. I have another question, two questions here. One is to explore more about the narrative. So I'm going to pose this question to Kate. Kate, you talk about changing the narrative, not only about public services, but also about changing the narrative about care. Would you like to go a little bit more in depth about that? And then I have another question here coming from the audience. And the question is there any way to reverse the trend of privatization of public services and commodification of the common when this is so embedded in the neoliberal states? And I'm going to ask that question to Angela, that was stressing the political form. And then there is another question about public service and gender that is really in line with what you, Veronica, was explaining. So I'm going to ask you if you can then go also a little bit more in depth about this concept of gender responsive and transformative public services. So Kate, Angela, and Veronica, you have the floor to respond to the question. Thank you.
Sure. On the question of narrative, I'm increasingly kind of evangelist of this idea that, what we really have to work on is the economic justice, human rights, gender justice sector is really this issue of shifting the narrative, because I think that's the battle that we've lost in the last 30 years. I don't think we've lost the battle of the evidence. I don't think we've lost the battle of the ideology. But I think we have lost the battle of the narrative to a large extent. And then the kind of the neoliberal actors have then, co-opted a lot of our language and our terms, like women's empowerment, was initially, a much more radical idea, and then it was co-opted by, the World Bank and whoever else to mean something very different. So So that it's been it's a kind of constant battle, but I think we need to put more and more energy and efforts into it. I mean, I think there are lots of different ways to do it, but I think ultimately, like, to kind of seize the idea that the economy is not something technocratic or something kind of out there that's immutable. Like, the economy is like what we all do. It's like how we relate to each other. The economy, like, people are the economy. And that, you know, inequality is a policy choice, poverty is a policy choice, and so we can choose to tackle those things. We can choose to unmake inequality and poverty. And I think, you know, I think the tax justice movement has something to show us in this regard. I think the tax justice movement have been quite successful in kind of really shifting the narrative around taxes. And now you see, like, public opinion polls in many countries are in favor of, like, tax justice, taxing the rich, like taxing Jeff Bezos, you know. So I do think that there has been a shift there that we can learn from. I also think that we just need to be constantly challenging some of these kind of terms and ideas that the kind of vanguards of neoliberalism are constantly using. Or, you know, the idea that there's such a thing as, like, a gender neutral policy, for example, is just it's a total fallacy. Like, there is no such thing. And so, like, all policies have to be gender sensitive, or gender transformative, even better, as Veronica says, because all policies have gendered impacts. This idea of efficiency, or like market-led solutions, you know, we just need to be constantly interrogating, like, what does that really mean, and what's the cost of efficiency? Like, why are we prioritizing efficiency and not equity? Now, I think we need to be constantly, like, interrogating those terms. And I think on care, you know, I really like the work that PSI is doing around this. I think there's lots of exciting initiatives around changing the narratives on care. And one thing in terms of care and economic policy is that, you know, care is often talked about as a cost. Is like this idea, like, oh, but it's so expensive to provide childcare to everyone, or it's so expensive. But it's like, care should be, we should be reconceptualizing care as an investment, like as an investment in the planet, in our future, in gender equality. And so we need to just be constantly talking and thinking about care as an investment, I think. And also, sorry, I wrap up now. I know I'm going on. I could talk about this for hours. I also think those of us in the human rights community really need to work on making the human rights discourse more accessible as well, because I think often the human rights discourse can be very legalistic and off-putting to people, and we need to work on that. I think that's a bit of self-critique there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kate. Now, Angela, is change possible? What are the political means that we have to push for the changes?
So I guess, of course, change is possible. Therefore, because it's a function of whether you are committed enough to taking it to the end. What is it that makes for successful mobilization? I guess it's the common sense bits of getting your narrative right, by which it's making sure that your message is formulated in a way that it resonates with the majority of people. We often don't do something as basic as which the other side does. At least test your messages before you put them out on social media, etc. It's engagement with the consistent engagement with the media. It's a consistent engagement with citizens, both larger movements and civil society, formalized groups. It's reaching out to citizens. I mean, there is no royal road to mobilization which others have not attempted before. It's just that it needs to be done. Yes, as someone pointed out, we all live in the context of shrinking civil society space. Yes, we do have to deal with authoritarian states, but fundamentally, again, it's about playing this space in a slightly smarter way. And it's not like change will happen overnight. So therefore, it's an incremental process of undoing a decade or two of policies that have not gone our way. And evidence across the world shows that the fight back against privatization have started. So therefore, don't give up very fast, because things will not change overnight. Miracles don't happen uh, uh, without hard work.
Thank you very much, Angela. Veronica, you have the floor now for the question on gender responsiveness and transformative change.
Yes, I think that at first we need to focus on essential public services. When we are talking on essential public services, we are saying that those services have to be public. Those services are not allowed to be in private hands, because those services are essential for life and are essential also for constructing better and more equal societies. So when we are talking of essential services, we are talking especially around five public services: health, education, care, water and sanitation, and energy. And we have I can say a profound disagreement with all the UN narrative about infrastructure, because we don't want, or we don't think that it's necessary to displace the concept of public services and putting public services or disaggregating public services in infrastructure. We have seen that the UN narrative has put, for example, water, sanitation, energy, and roads as public or as infrastructure. We think that they are public services, and we need to claim for that. So talking about these five range of public services, we think that for making them gender responsive and gender transformative, we need to think at first, what are the intersectional dimensions of these services on population, and how we can address those intersectional dimensions or intersectional needs of this population, of these services. Talking about health, I was explaining on our study in Peru. What we saw in Peru is that, yes, the public investment in the health services was increased, but the policy, the gender policy of the public health services, what was the same. The public policy was a policy that only was making discrimination more bearable, I can say. So the thing is that we need to really identify those intersectional dimensions. We need to identify those specific public services that are essential for communities, and then we can construct a policy that can transform the public services and also transform lives.
Thank you very much, Veronica. At the beginning of this panel, I promised you great speakers, and I think that I have delivered on that. We have had a great discussion. We only have 5 minutes left, and I'm going to go back to our panelists. The panelists have had the chance to look at some of the questions that there have been posted in the chat. And I'm going to ask the very difficult task to each of the panelists to give us their final words, really in 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes maximum. So, to keep the discussion, but I'm also going to invite everyone that you have the links to put the work that your organization is doing, or the work that you think it is interesting, post it there. We're going to put it in the outcome document of this panel. And also, if you want to keep in touch and receive the information, put your data in the first Excel sheet that we share, where you can put your name, organization, and email. Now we have really 4 minutes left, 1 minute for each speaker. Kate, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Yeah, this has been such a rich discussion. I wish we could all talk for much longer, but the discussion will continue in different forms. So yeah, I'll just in closing, I'll just say, we've talked a lot about, the COVID context as kind of both a risk and an opportunity. I do think it's an opportunity in some respects, because I do think it's highlighted to a lot of people the importance of public services and why we need them to be public, and especially has, opened a lot of eyes about care as well, and like how much our societies really depend on care and take it for granted. But I do think, that the door is closing, and, we're seeing that, the like austerity is coming back, or at least like certain actors are trying to push austerity back. And, the IMF is locking countries into kind of new austerity by another name agreements in the coming years. So in the medium term, there is going to be another push for austerity. And so we need to be on guard, and we need to be fighting against that. And I do think, as I said in the chat, I do think that trying to hold the IFIs accountable and hold their feet to the fire is really crucial in that respect.
Veronica, your final minute. Thank you.
Yes, I think that we need to build alliances. For us, for the trade union movement, and for women in the trade union movement, is essential to have allies in civil society and in the feminist movements. So we can build on a force capable to reverse the trend. And we think that that is for sure possible. I think that the COVID pandemic has also shown us the way that we could also build these linkages. We are doing that. We are talking between movements. We are trying to construct these new approaches, these new narratives. I think that at first thinking what to do and how to do it is the first moment, and then to act. We need to act, and we as the trade union, we are ready to do it.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Angela.
I guess it's our moment. If we cannot make the point of the relevance of public services and the need to regulate the private on the back of a pandemic of this nature, when it's the public health workers who have been at the front line of response, at a time when the private sector has been violating many of the rights of its citizens, be it in terms of the in the India's context at least, was completely absent in the COVID response in the first few months with respect to health, and has, in the case of education, has been responsible for hiking fees and otherwise in the middle of a crisis of this nature, when parents are obviously losing their jobs, have been hiking fees. despite repeated government orders to the contrary. If we can't make the point that a friend in need is a friend indeed, and the private sector has not been a friend for the majority of citizens at the back of the pandemic, we will not be able to make this point ever. Therefore, this is the time to, yes, to make alliances, yes, to make to build narrative, but it's the time to act is now. And and change is possible providing we don't lose the moment that is available to us once in 100 years. If we don't use this moment now, we will never, the opportunity to do so will never come again.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you, Veronica, Kate. I also like to thank Alejandra, who has been helping me in this discussion. This was a wonderful discussion. As Kate said, this is just the beginning. We will continue, all the co-organizers, Kate, Veronica, and Angela. We will continue to work on this and reach out to those who have put their names and other colleagues and organizations. Thank you all. It's very late in this part of the world where I'm in Latin America. So I wish you a successful continuation of the forum for all of you who are during daylight. Thank you all. It has been a pleasure to moderate this session. Goodbye. Goodbye. Nice seeing your faces.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.